Hello everyone, and welcome back to the part 22 of our tutorial series where we are making our RAG powered AI application intelligent by adding a more number of data sources. In the previous video, I just talked about the most interesting and the challenging database or the data source which we are trying to integrate is InfluxDB. As you can see on my screen, what I have done is I have created a Python program through which I am feeding a data within an API latency measurement, which is equivalent to the table in a relational database. So measurement is just a terminology which we use in a InfluxDB, which is pretty much saying like what we have like a table in a relational database, right? So right now you can see we have a spikes here, right? And these spikes are nothing but which is just showing, we have a latency spike for the payment service, at regular intervals. So this is just to create a database on which, our RAG application going to provide us, the more intelligent responses way ahead of time. So by having these trends, by having the capability of LLMs, we can predict what's going to happen in a near future. And that was also going to help us to figure out the root cause of the pattern when this can happen, right? So very interesting and a challenging journey. And I'm just going to explain a step by step how you can set up an InfluxDB, how you can have this data flowing continuously to the InfluxDB, and how you can extract the data as well through the Python code. So here is what we're going to do, right? So the flow which we have, which I thought is, this is the scenario which we decided in the previous part that as a SRE or the site reliability engineer, we want to understand the system performance issue. The main question which we are targeting, right? What caused the spike in API latency for the payment service in the last hour, and were there any related AIOps, right? So we are just trying to understand this situation based on the data which I'm just showing on your screen in the InfluxDB, right? So what RAG application is going to do? We're gonna ask this, okay, can you just tell me what caused the spike in the API? So this is how our RAG application is going to going to just analyze the data which we have in InfluxDB and figure it out and what's going on. And based on that, it is going to give us the response based on the question which SRE person is interested in, right? So without further delay, let's get into the setup part, how you can just set up an InfluxDB version 2. Recently, InfluxDB has announced version V3 as well. I haven't started using a V3, but if you are interested, you can use the 3 as well with the minor changes here and there. But I am not sure what all changes you have to make. But for InfluxDB V2, we are going to use the latest and the greatest Docker image, and for that, I have done is I just created this Docker command, which I can share with you in the description, and you can also use the same command. So it's very standard way Docker run. I'm running in a detached mode, and I'm just giving this name as an InfluxDB tutorial. And I'm just running on my local host machine so that, through the local machine itself, I can make a connection to my container. You can use the published port as well if you want, but I always prefer to just have this net host. Then we have two volumes which we are mounting. One for the InfluxDB data and another one is related to the InfluxDB configuration. But that is not something which we should be worried about. If you are really interested, I have created a complete tutorial series in InfluxDB. You can watch that and find the link in the top right of your window as well as in a description part. So these are some important, environmental variable. You can just read through the documentation. The documentation is pretty comprehensive. You can come here and you can just look for all those environmental variables. Major one is the username and the password and the organization. This is just isolate. If you want to have, if you are having a multiple organization in your infrastructure, this is the way you can isolate that. And inside that we have a bucket. So basically, if you want to understand a bucket, it's kind of a logical schema which we have in our not a logical, but the physical schema which we have in a relational database. So inside that schema, you can have multiple tables. Here in InfluxDB, you can have multiple measurements. So measurement is pretty much equivalent to the table, but in measurement, we have two kind of fields, the tag fields and the actual field where the value actually gets stored. And you will understand this in just a couple of moments. Okay. And then the image name, right? So once you run this command, I will share this command, then you will have your container up and running. Since I have already run this, right? So I can quickly show you that on my Docker desktop. This is how it looks like, right? So InfluxDB tutorial is actually running without any issue. Okay, how you can access that? Since this by default run on local host 8086. So you can see if the moment you just put this local host 808, let me just open another tag, another tab, and let me just put this. Okay, so let me just open up another. Okay, so if I just go the host, it will ask for the username and the password. How you can get a username and the password? You can get this from the Docker command. Username and InfluxDB tutorial. Put here. Then this is the password you need. Okay, and then you click on sign on. You will come here. On the left side, you can just see the sources bucket and all this stuff. So sources, how you want to source your data. Then we have a bucket. So in bucket, we can see what kind of buckets we have. So I just created this system service, Docker resource, and basically I'm just loading a data inside the system service. If you just go inside the system service, these are the buckets, right? So in bucket, this is the measurement. We have an API latency, and this is the measurement which I created with a mention that it's pretty much same like what we have it here with the relational. Once you click on that, this is not something which you should be worried about now. You will understand all these things, how these things are happening. And if you click this, then you will get this data on your screen. So this is continuously being fed by this application, by this program, which I just currently triggered. And I'm going to explain how you can do the same. Right? So what all things you can do with this, right? You can create the bucket. If you want, you can just create a new bucket. You can just give whatever name you want, test one, right? And you can just do that. And then for measurement, you don't have to create it. The moment you will be adding a first, record with giving whatever the measurement you want to give, then it will create the measurement for you. Okay. Now, what is the next thing you have to understand? You understand bucket, concept of bucket. You understand the measurement, which is pretty much similar to table. Then what happens is, if you want to add a data, so there are multiple ways through which you can load the data, right? So loading a data is, you can just click on source and you can see you can upload a CSV, line protocol, and through the Influx CLI as well. Line protocol, this is something through manually you can enter the data. How you can enter the data, right? So I can just copy this part of data, right? And I will just explain what this line is doing. Here you can just come here and you can just put this. Once you do that, so let's quickly understand what is this, right? So this is how this structure looks like. The very first thing, which is home, which is your measurement, right? Then you have a tag set. So first comma after the first name, which is home, which is measurement, then you have this room living. Room is going to be your tag field, and the value of this is living. Right now you can see room is the common, but the values are changing. So we call this as a tag field. So we can have as many as tags we want by just having another comma. So the very first comma after measurement, it is going to indicate now you are having a tag field. Then once you have a very first space, after that it tells now these are the actual field which are going to have a actual numerical value, which is depend upon the each and every timestamp. Now you can see temperature is the field and then the humidity, right? So these are the two fields, and then we have a CO. Again, there is a first white space, and then we have these three fields, and then this is the timestamp at which this measurement is captured and stored. So this entire structure is known as a line protocol. So it's having a very specific structure in which you have to load the data. The other way is what you can do, you can write your Python program, and that is where what you have to do. We are done with this, setup of InfluxDB. I just explained you what is measurement, tags, and a field and timestamp. Line protocol point is something which we're going to understand in the context of, Python, right? So every row, so you can say we have these many lines. So every specific value or specific record is known as point, and that is what we're going to understand in a couple of minutes. Now, the next thing which we want is we want to load the continuous data to the InfluxDB so that we can have this kind of graph, which I was just showing on my screen. This graph. How I am able to do that? So I just use a Python code to do this, right? So this is the Python code which I have written, right? Now, to use a Python code, what you have to have your dependency install, and which is a Python client for the interacting with InfluxDB. So what you have to do is, this is a Python client, so you have to use pip install InfluxDB underscore 12. Right? Since it is already installed, so that's the reason it's saying it's there, right? The another thing which you need is python.env, which is just to load the environmental variable. Again, this is installed, so it's going to give us the requirements. So these are the two dependencies which you need, right? So what you need, the next thing is you need to make a connection. Just to make a connection to the InfluxDB, you need this InfluxDB client, right? So in this InfluxDB client, you have to feed in three parameters which are mandatory, like your URL, which is basically the server URL where your InfluxDB is running, then the token, and then the org. Org is the organization, and you can get this when we have set up our Docker-based InfluxDB server, and our organization is InfluxDB, right? The next thing is, we need a token. So getting a token, you have to come here. You can click on this sources, this up arrow on a left pane, and then you can click on API tokens, and then you can generate a new token. And once you generate a new token, you can just give any name, and this is going to create that, and you can just copy the stuff and just put it here, or you can just save it in your .environmental file. So I can just quickly show you, because this is always going to be changed the moment I will just remove my Docker container. This new InfluxDB token has to be created. Okay, so now here, if you see, this is my URL, because this is where InfluxDB is running. Then this is the organization. Again, during the setup in the Docker container, we use that. And this is the bucket which we need. So as I explained how you can create the bucket as well. So once you have this environmental file created, then we can just come back here and we can just load that with the load environment, which is the library through which we can load the environmental variable. And this is where I'm just extracting those by using the OS module. Right. So this is pretty much a Python kind of stuff. So once we have a client done, we are just checking with health, whether the health status is, pass or not. So this is not something which we should be worried about. The another thing is, once you have this client initialized properly, then you can call this write_API method, where you can say the write operation synchronous. There are asynchronous mode as well, but synchronous is once you just put one point, until or unless that gets stored, your control will not back to the. So basically, it is just ensuring that, whatever data you are sending is actually being stored to the InfluxDB. Now, measurement name, I am just using a API latency, because this is what we are actually trying to mimic our data, what we have in InfluxDB, to the real-time data where we want to measure a API latency for the payment service. So I just give this payment name, and the endpoint is process, which is pretty much like, okay, if you have a payment service, like what kind of endpoint you have exposed through which you are just giving the matrix to the any database, or the Prometheus, or TimeSeries database where you want to store that data. Next thing is the normal latency range. I'm saying if I just need a normal latency, means if the value is between the 50 to 150, then it's a normal latency. But once this latency goes beyond 400 and up to 600, we are calling it a spike in a latency, which is going to indicate that now something goofy is going on. Maybe the high load, high traffic is in our system, which is causing this high latency for us. Right? Then rest of the logic is straightforward, which is just quite, what precisely you want. So I just wanted to check, okay, whether, I want to just have a regular spike. So for that, what I'm doing, I'm using a random, library to just get the uniform value between, whatever the normal range is. Whenever I'm in a spike, then I want the value in between 400 to 600. So this is the logic which I have written. So you don't need to worry about, if you're really interested, I can explain that, but it's going to take a lot of. This is where the important point is, and this is the point where we are just making what data we want. So this is a class point. If you see, we have imported that here from the Influx client. And then the very first parameter which we are passing through this is the measurement. Once we have a measurement name, then we can just define the tag by this. Like, so we are saying tag, okay, now I want a service, and what value is service? So it's a key value pair. The key is going to the tag name, and the value is service. And service name we have defined here. If you just see this payment, and the endpoint is. So these are the two tags which we have, endpoint and the service, which is going to help us to just filter the data. And then we have a value. This is my actual field where the actual data is residing with related to the API latency. Once we have this point defined and we have a write API defined with our client, now we have to just use this logic. Write API dot write, and there we have to say which bucket where we have to create this measurement if it does not exist, right? So this is bucket organization, and then in the record we have to give this point value, which is the actual one single record. and then it's keep adding it, and then it's keep writing it, and then this is just a exception handling. If something happens, something wrong happens, then we have to do this. So this is how this code is actually keep feeding in the data, right? So you don't have to worry about all those things. There are a lot of configurations involved in this. I will share the code with you and GitHub, and you can just go through by yourself. And wherever you have a problem, you can ask me, right? So where, at what regular interval, we should have a spike, what should be the duration of the spike. So here you can see this kind of consistency which we have, right? So we continuously getting this data. Right now, the next thing is if we want to just extract that data with Python. So this is very simple. Again, a very simple code, same thing, everything we have to initialize the client rather than using the right API. Now we are saying query API, and this is the Flux language through which we can extract the data. You can use the FluxQL as well, but I'm just using Flux because this is very, very powerful. So this is just a syntax which you have to understand. So how you can understand, you can just come here and you can just understand the Flux. This is a very comprehensive documentation. If you just go through the Flux like query data portion, then it will just explain how this Flux is a structure, how you can use that, what every field does, and how you can just form your query. The other thing what you can do is whenever you are extracting a data on UI, you can always click on the script editor where it will take you to the query builder, and you can just get the query as well from here, right? So what it is doing, whatever value, you are saying, okay, now I want the data from this bucket. Okay, then you will say, okay, range, meaning, how long, in which duration you want to extract the data. So I'm saying from last 1 hour. Then it says that, okay, from which measurement, because there is a possibility that you can have a multiple measurement in your bucket. So I'm saying API latency. Okay, now in API latency, you can have multiple endpoints, right? So right now we have, you can have multiple services, right? So services payment, there can be order management, there can be inventory management. So, right. So then you can say, okay, I want the data for payment and the endpoint is process, and then I need a value for that. And then what it's saying, okay, I just yield it. This is something I don't want to explain because it's very complicated, and you can just go through the documentation, you can understand it. Then all you need is once you have this query built, then you can just call this query underscore API, which you created with this method, and then you can feed in the query and you will get the answer. This is going to give you the iterative object, so you can iterate through. You can say table in tables, and then you can get the records inside the given record. And that is how you can just iterate through the data. Right. So if you want to run this, you can just simply run that. I know this video has become a little longer, but this is what you have to do to understand how you can set up the InfluxDB, how you can continuously load the data, which can be used by our RAG application to have a more intelligent response regarding how the system or specific services behaving. And then we're going to see what kind of intelligent response large language model can provide to us by using this data, what kind of help it can provide. So the use case which we have defined for us, right, where we are saying that we are going to help a SRE team to understand what kind of issue which is causing a spike in a API latency, right? So now this is a very high level flow. You can understand that what we need to import environments. We have to import the libraries and set up an environmental variable, InfluxDB configuration, client initialization, right API. This is just a flow, high level flow, which I just kept for myself just to understand when I just do a coding part. And same thing here. These are the steps through which you can just write your interaction logic with the InfluxDB. Okay, so that's pretty much it from my side for this particular video. If you have any feedback or suggestion, feel free to put that into the comment section, because in our next section, what we're going to do is we are going to see how we can utilize this data to just power our AI application which we have built so far with the other data sources, and we can see what kind of intelligent information we can extract from these time series database data points. Right. So if you really like this video, give a thumbs up. And if you feel this video can help your friends, colleagues, and groups, please feel free to share with them. And if you haven't subscribed for my channel, it would be highly appreciated if you can subscribe for my channel as well. Thanks for watching this. And as always, stay healthy and keep learning new things.